So going back, I know I just got a few slides, a couple of sentences in, but we know the end of empire is going to stem from the reactions of colonies from World War I and World War II. Were the colonies treated nicely? No, we know that they've been used in colonization, right, and in imperialism for their resources. They're eventually used during the war. And after World War I and World War II, during the Cold War, a lot of them will be part of NATO and Warsaw. And they don't like this. And eventually this is what's going to strike out for them to get their freedom. And we're going to see this specifically happens in India, which we've already seen this one before, right? We see that the Indian people have helped out in World War I, and they're really upset. Eventually, after the war, the British come in and do the Indian Act. That is going to really partition India into two countries. It's going to partition India into India and what's the other country? Pakistan. Pakistan is for who? The Hindus or the Muslims? Muslims, and India is for the Hindus. And we're going to see Gandhi really focus on working between these people. He says, look, if we keep on having this bickering, this fighting, the British are still going to be able to control us. And Mahatma Gandhi will work between the people, and he's also going to work for a class of people who are at the bottom of Hindu society. Do y'all remember the people who are at the bottom of Hindu society? The untouchables. And he's going to work in endeavors to help those people. We're going to see reasons for the change, which we already talked about, the war, World War I and World War II. We see the Depression, these colonial powers are not going to provide anything to their colonies. And in the Cold War, they're going to kind of use them to be their pawns, either to be part of NATO or to be part of Warsaw. What we're going to see is that several of these colonial areas will come together and basically endorse this thing called non-alignment. That they do not want to align with the U.S. or the Soviet Union. Because if they align with them in the Cold War, could they possibly be used again, like they were in World War I and World War II for soldiers? And so they agree is to maintain formal neutrality so they will not be used again, because there's been this cycle with them, right? Colonialism, imperialism, World War I and World War II, that they were being used. Ultimately, it will fail due to a lack of unity on the home front with them, and the Cold War neutrality was a good idea but not realistic in this global scope of nuclear weapons. So the next thing we're going to talk about is Vietnam. Vietnam, you're going to see this next year in U.S., is actually an area where the Japanese had taken over prior to World War II for resources. Vietnam is very important for rubber, tin, and rice. And we know Japan didn't have much resources. So after World War II, the French are going to try to come back in and gain control of Vietnam. And we're going to see Ho Chi Minh is going to be a nationalist. And he writes a letter to Truman saying, hey, we're trying to throw off an oppressive motherland. Will you help us? But the problem is we will help the French because they would help us in the American Revolution gain our independence. So Ho Chi Minh will get aid from China and the Soviet Union. Eventually, the French will lose. And they're going to lose in a battle called Dien Bien Phu. And this will lead to a conference at Geneva. And in this conference at Geneva, this is my bad Vietnam, they're going to divide Vietnam at the 17th parallel, which should seem very similar to what they did in Korea. They're going to allow Ho Chi Minh, which we saw in our study guide, right? They're going to allow Ho Chi Minh to obtain North Vietnam. But did he win the war? He won the war against the French. Should they allow them to have all of Vietnam? The U.S. is going to come in at this time because we bankrolled the French, saying, look, South Vietnam will be under U.S. control. And eventually, in 2 years, we'll have free elections. Do you think that's going to happen? No, because if they were to have free elections, who would have won? Ho Chi Minh, because the U.S. is going to put a guy in here named Diem. Diem is a Catholic. Are they Catholic in Vietnam? Do y'all remember what religion dominated in Southeast Asia? They have monks. Buddhism. Okay? They're Buddhists here. He burns down the pagodas. Do you think these people are businessmen or agrarian farmers? Farmers. He takes away their land. He burns down the pagodas. Do you think the people of South Vietnam want him? No. And we're going to see that the North and South will go to war because Ho Chi Minh will attack South Vietnam and try to gain control of it. Okay, what we're going to see, eventually Ho Chi Minh will get all of Vietnam. And you'll have this more in depth in U.S. history because the U.S. will get involved. But now we're going to look at the Arab states. The Arab states had the English controlling it, and the English were interested in this area of Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, and Jordan, first off for oil. The second reason is that this is the area of holy sites. And so the Balfour Declaration will come out. And basically, Great Britain commits itself to the homeland for the Jews. Because what event have we just seen where we're going to try to help the Jews out? The Holocaust, because they had been in different nations, and within those nations they had been oppressed. And so this is called the Zionist movement. We're trying to get a homeland for the Jews, and the Jews want to go back to an area of their holy land, but the Arabs control that. And we're going to see the Zionist movement is in reaction to the anti-Semitism that was building up from World War II. And so in this whole thing, the British start to say, okay, let's move them to Palestine, which we've known that areas had religious conflict because the Christians have been there, the Muslims have been there too. And we're going to see the Palestinian Arabs, which are Muslims, are upset about this huge Jewish influx because they fear that they're going to lose this land. And here's Balfour just making that declaration, which by moving the Jewish people here, are we going to have issues? And this is what's going to lead to war, the creation of Israel. And Great Britain is going to give up the Jewish people in this area to the UN. And the UN is going to create this nation of what we know as Israel. The Arabs are going to get upset because wasn't this their land? And they're taking it away from them. And we're going to see that they divide this area up into Jewish territory, which is the orange, and then the yellow territory, which is the Arabs. And the Arabs still control Jerusalem. But what the UN will come in is they will come in and nationalize that area so that we don't have much skirmishes. But do you think fights will occur? Okay. We're going to see they divide this, and eventually there will be an independent state of Israel by 48. Okay. And then eventually Israel will attack. Do y'all see this little area that has the little lines here? Israel will take over the Sinai Peninsula, which will lead to a war between Egypt and Israel. And eventually Jimmy Carter will negotiate the peace here. There's going to be challenges for Israel. Many of it is that they're taking Arab land away. And this is what's going to lead to the Pan-Arab movement to get the Jewish people out. And we're going to see in 48 and 49, there's a little skirmish. Eventually in 56, we have the 6 Days War. In 67, they obtain the Sinai Peninsula. In 73, Egypt is going to attack Israel again. And then in 82, and then we even have modern day stuff. So always there is going to be conflict in the Middle East. And we're going to see violence continues into the 21st century as long as the Israel's people are in this area and expanding. Okay. Now we're going to look at Africa. One of the big things in Africa was there only one nation that colonized Africa? Do y'all remember some nations that came in here? Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy. And so what we're going to see is gaining independence for Africa is going to be very long because there's a lot of motherlands. And we're going to see also within Africa, there's a lot of different tribes, there's different ethnic groups, different religions, and different languages. And so France, what it immediately is going to do is going to declare all of them independent of its colonies except Algeria. Do you think Algeria is going to get upset? Because everybody else is getting free. And this is going to lead to the Algerian War for Liberation. And we're going to see the Front de Liberation is their liberation front where they bring in guerrilla warriors. And eventually Algeria will gain its independence in 1962. And a lot of this stemmed from Frantz Fanon, an Algerian revolutionary guy, but it's their movement in Africa, specifically in Algeria, that is going to galvanize other people to declare independence. We eventually see in Ghana, I don't know if y'all know, this is Queen Elizabeth today, right? She's a very young woman. Hey, we're going to see she comes to the throne during World War II. And this is Ghana, and this is one of their leaders for independence. And what will happen is there will be a skirmish. Eventually, the way Ghana gets its independence through diplomacy will inspire other people to use their legislators, to use their people in office to gain a peaceful freedom. And Ghana will become the example for all of Africa. The last thing we're going to look at is Africa, South Africa. We know South Africa is important because it's at the tip, right? And being at the tip, did it have a lot of trade there? It was one of our ports, right? But we know most people are using the Suez, right? But still, people are coming around South Africa. And so South Africa, they had this system of separateness where they started to rank people. And they had a caste system. Like we saw in India, they started to put people in different castes. And who do you think was at the top? Blacks or whites? Whites. And then we're going to have different arrays of people. And we're going to see most of the people in South Africa are black. And there's going to be rules put in designed to keep the whites at top. And we're going to see the division of these colored people is done to prevent their unity. We're going to see eventually Nelson Mandela will rise up. Nelson Mandela is going to inspire direct action to end apartheid. And apartheid is where they're separating them. And this apartheid is what's keeping the African National Party at top. And we're going to see eventually he's going to ask for democratic rule for South Africa, that all people get to vote. If all people get to vote in South Africa, will the white majority rule? No, they will eventually be able to establish their own government. But we will see he will be jailed. And if he's jailed, what happens to the movement? It dies out. And we will see eventually this conflict will continue and he will be released by this guy, the new president of South Africa. He releases him from prison and we're going to see he legalizes this African party that is trying to galvanize the latter half of basically most of Africa to get independence. They will come into power. They will establish a new constitution which will allow free elections, and then eventually Nelson Mandela will become president. Okay, we're going to stop there and we're going to watch a little bit of Trevor Noah, and it wants us to go back. Okay. And I'm going to stop the video. Oh no, it just went to something else on Trevor Noah.